19th, 2018. All board members, with the exception of Andy Holleman, are present, and I'm going to turn it right over to the superintendent to get moving on our discussion items. Dr. Bishop.
Thank you, Madam President, and welcome to today's work session board. It's a beautiful sunny day, so we're always glad when we come inside. We have,
She says it.
yeah, we have quite a few folks here, and as you know, many of our principals are here as well because this has not been rolled out to the district. We wanted to share with the board the information first. For those that are listening and those that may get on the recording of this to find out what happened and what went on, we do want to make it very clear that the Anchorage School Board has not seen this as of yet, and the Anchorage administration has not made any recommendations based off of these data. This information that you're going to be presented is just to see, given the study and the different areas and perspectives for which the look was taken, I guess, the different, it wasn't just where are kids going to school, what's happening in the future, how is the building being used. There are many different angles for which this report was made, and Shannon Bingham is going to share those. We hope that the board engages with questions as you go through. But to know that as of today, there will be some suggestions and some possible actions that Western Demographics sees that might benefit the city of Anchorage as well as ASD. However, administration has not heard from the board, we haven't taken this outside of the report. And so we want to be very clear that tonight is not a recommendation, but the buildings and the boundaries and the different outcomes that come from Western Demographic Study will most likely, run like fire and say, this is what happened, but there is not a recommendation on today's agenda, nor is there a set one that we know of. It certainly takes a lot of feedback and a lot of discussion. So I hope I made that clear. We wanted to absolutely make that clear that this is Western Demographics study. This is just what they found. This is the kind of business they do. As you know, ASD internally over many years has done its own study. The city has done a study. There's been lots of discussion. So here is this third-party look that we can say, what did we find ourselves and what are they saying in regard to school construction, school consolidation, and school closure. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Shannon Bingham.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a privilege to be here. I'll try to move as quickly as I can. How long do I have, Dr. Bishop?
You have, we have about 15 minutes, is that right, Member Donley? 15 minutes for your report?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
So 5:15, you have an hour and 15 minutes.
Okay.
All right, clock's ticking.
Very good, thank you. So this report is the product of work of a variety of team members who have assisted me during the last 4 or 5 months in collecting this information. In addition to ASD staff, we've had significant help from Bettye Davis at the municipality of Anchorage in providing 2040 build-out data for the city and for the Chugiak-Eagle River area. We were also assisted by Jen Schmidt at the University of Alaska at Anchorage Bureau of let's see here, Institute for Social and Economic Research, or ICER as it's called. As far as who did what, I pretty much coordinated the work. I do a lot of build-out studies nationally for school districts to figure out what things will look like in 20 or 30 years, and this report is no different from that. It was really evaluating what our outlook for school facilities would be in 22 years according to the municipality of Anchorage's 2040 forecast. The housing data is very new. It was just recently provided week before last by the municipality of Anchorage. So it's been on the street for about 2 weeks, basically. So it represents a lot of work by 3 key staff members in their GIS and planning department, and they expended a lot of time working on this. The ICER data is focusing on converting the housing data to student impacts in our individual schools. So when they look at our data, they're looking at school utilization, what are our current utilizations, and what would our utilization be in about 2040. On average, we get 0.38 children per house. So 1 in 3 Anchorage households has a student. So the formula that they use is varied and differs geographically as you go around the district. The magnitude of infill housing in the municipality of Anchorage's 2040 forecast suggests that we would pick up about 26,500 additional housing units by 2040. Now, some of those would be in exchange for taking some other units offline. I'll talk about that briefly. But for the most part, any community that has added to its housing stock has had a corresponding growth in population, corresponding growth in students. When parents move someplace, they typically take their children with them. Now, there is also job growth that is required in order to make that a reality. We acknowledge that there is some ambiguity in this, but for the most part, we're looking at this housing forecast, converting it to a student growth profile, and coming up with what our impacts would be on our schools by 2040. There is a significant effect on whether or not large-scale consolidation is possible or advisable in the municipality of Anchorage for the short and mid-term based on this data. Basically, we're seeing hundreds and thousands of units in some cases in individual elementary school attendance areas coming online. And at 0.39 children per household, that's a pretty significant effect. So that is something that we need to take very seriously as we look at what our future school facility situation might be. Accordingly, I have looked at what would that future look like, what sort of school closures, replacements, and boundary changes might be necessary in an incremental way, and what might affect our CIP for the next 6 years. So I'm taking a really, really long-term look, but some of our suggestions are things that affect the 6-year CIP. There are 7 potential facility actions that I'm suggesting tonight. It is typically my style to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then tell you what I told you. So that'll be what you'll see tonight in as time efficient a way as I can deliver that and still respond to your questions. So this next slide shows a pie. So I've joked with some of the staff here that I've been making pies for about 2 months, but basically when I look at a school district, I evaluate 8 or 9 typical things. These are also the 8 or 9 typical things that most school district master plans evaluate as they look forward into the future at schools and what indicates a viable facility for the long term, or a facility that you might have to make some sort of a change with, either boundaries, adding to that school, replacing that school, closing that school. The 8 slices of the pie are 2017 school utilization. I've been provided forecasts done by Northern Economics for the district that indicate what our facility utilization currently is, and that's 1/8 of the pie. The next slice is the slice that was provided by the municipality of Anchorage, tempered by ICER, which represents 2040 school utilization. So that is suggesting, okay, with the schools that you've got, what would they look like by 2040? So that's the next slice of the pie. The third slice of the pie is called an education adequacy index. That's a statistic that is collected and maintained by the district. Generally, external consultants come in and evaluate your education specifications, meaning what size are certain facilities in a building, and they tell you what the EA or EAI of a school is, and that basically means for your new schools, how well do they comply with the spec that you've drawn, and for your older schools, how well do they work given what you build and design new, given the requirements of the modern education program. So education adequacy typically is very important. It can be very confusing. I've worked with a lot of boards that have built buildings very quickly under budgetary duress and had to leave things off. So every now and then you'll look at a newer building that may be missing 6 or 8 classrooms or an auxiliary gym, or the library may be undersized or something to that effect. And when somebody external comes in and runs an education adequacy index, sometimes they will show a lower EA because that building doesn't necessarily have everything that that district is saying it wants to have. The 2-year facility condition index basically is just that. Over the next 24 months, what do we expect relative to other buildings in our district, the condition of individual buildings to be on some sort of a measuring stick. A lot of times that measuring stick can be very confusing, but in general, the smaller the facility condition index and the smaller the number for an EA, the better that facility would be. So a 0 for an FCI or facility condition is good. Brand new building or newer building or building that's really doing everything right. An EA or a facility condition index of 0.6 or 0.7 or even higher would indicate a building that is a less functional building in poorer condition. We also do that for our sites. That is the 5th slice of that pie, the 2-year site facility condition index. Sites are very important. Parent drops, bus drops. I spend a huge amount of my career dealing with problems associated with how the area outside of a school is built and functions. Those are huge things. So we monitor those things. Co-location. A lot of districts nationally put 2 schools on 1 campus. That's always been a really effective, really efficient way for school districts to be as effective as possible. They concentrate resources in one area. School districts almost never close or consolidate buildings where there are 2 facilities on 1 campus. Those almost always are seen as some of the most efficient operations that we have. We have 7 or 8 of those. So that's one slice of the pie. Prior investment. In our case, it's what's the absolute dollar amount that we've spent over the last 20 years on our facilities. Now that number isn't perfect. Our accounting systems have changed over time, but for the most part, we do have a metric that shows what we've spent. The idea being, let's see, I just put a new transmission in my truck. Do I want to sell it? Well, probably not. So the idea becomes that schools that you have recent or very significant investments in, that's one factor. Now that truck may not run. So basically, the FCI of that truck is very high. It doesn't work, but you just spent a bunch of money on it. This kind of illustrates that all of these things kind of go into a soup when you think about what facilities in your quiver of schools are most viable. The last one is average age. For the most part, schools in the United States, a lot of them were built kind of right at the end, right at the beginning of the baby boom. So there were a lot of schools built in the mid-60s that are getting to be 55 or 60 years of age now. And a lot of those schools are in pretty tired condition. So nationally, in every state that I work in and in most of the districts that I work in, school districts have gotten into the business of, instead of doing an incremental renovation or an incremental addition, they'll go ahead and replace those schools. So that has become something. If you look at, you've got 100 schools. If we replace 1 school a year, In 50 years, our average school would be 95 or 100 years old. So at a certain point, in order to just kind of stay ahead of hubris, you have to look at the idea of school replacement. And I'll be talking with you a little bit about that tonight. Basically, those 8 slices of the pie are really important. Looking at them in isolation with even good data can be hazardous, basically, because a lot of schools, the statistics aren't necessarily perfect. They're good, but for the most part, most school districts, most school architects, most people that are looking at school district build-out or master plans understand that you have to look at the whole pie. So the whole idea here is that come up with a number for those pies. Which is the best pie, which is the not so good pie, and which are the pies we want to keep, and which are the pies that we know we're going to have to invest in, make changes to, and keep working on over time. I've given these scores of 1 to 5 or 5 to 1. 5 is good, 1 is less favorable. In general, I use quintiles, but in some of my rating schedules, I have made exception. A quintile is just every 20% I have a break, just like when you're scoring something. School utilization is measured against a desirable utilization that I use nationally of 88%. I think our district adopted standard here is about 90. So we're just kind of right in tune with each other within about 2% on how I look at these things nationally. I did look at our school utilization a little different because we have some schools that go way high because of the utilization data. So instead of giving everybody that's over 100% the best score possible, I know that some of those schools will crowd, will have to do boundary changes, will have to address their capacity over time, and that will result in our having to address that somehow. So those schools actually get a little bit of a penalty as they go way over what they're designed to hold. And we do that by standard deviations from that desired utilization rate of about 88%. Let's see, I keep consistently pushing the wrong button here. Here are the potential facility actions that I am suggesting we explore carefully tonight. There are 7 items here. Some of these are very significant things that the community will be very concerned about, and I do not take this lightly. I've spent a significant amount of time in this community exploring, understanding what our needs and priorities are, talking with just about everybody that I possibly can. And at this point, these are my suggestions. I'm suggesting that we move forward with closing Orion Elementary. Both Orion and Aurora are well below or at 50% capacity or just below if you look at them together, and they're paired. They're within about 450 yards of each other, and so those 2 schools are probably one of the most straightforward consolidation observations I've seen in a while. We've networked extensively with the JBEAR leadership. Their indication is that there is no immediate plan for increase in force on JBEAR. We're looking at a stable military population, and those 2 schools are functioning about half full. We believe that we could do a better job with instructional staff, with staffing resources that follow student enrollment, with people being consolidated in one location with a desirable economy of scale by consolidating to one facility. So therefore, I am suggesting that we move forward with consolidating the majority of the Orion enrollment into Aurora Elementary, with a little bit of maybe look at Mount Spur as well, just to make sure everything balances perfectly, in order to facilitate that school becoming a more efficient and larger education community. My second suggestion is associated with Central Middle School. I'm suggesting that we move forward with implementing a transitional usage for that school away from it being a neighborhood population predominant school, that the enrollment would be divided between Romig, Windler, and Clark Middle School, that we would look at retaining an innovative program in that facility. It may very well be the existing science program that's there that's been very effective, but we would be looking more at a magnet foundation, non-attendance area basis for that school. The administration is thinking very carefully about what's in our best interest with that facility. We know we want to hang on to it for a long time because the municipality of Anchorage is proposing a significant amount of medium and high density residential development in that area, and we know 10 years from now that neighborhood will look different. But what we're suggesting is transitional usage of that facility with eventual replacement in mind. That's item 2. We are proposing 3 replacements. We have 3 neighborhoods that, in my opinion, are some of the most solid, affordable family housing in the district. Those are located at Inlet View Elementary, Abbott Loop Elementary, and Gruning Middle School. And those 3 facilities would be replaced more or less in their existing location. We're carefully looking at what's in the best interest of the district, but those are schools that we know will be viable educational institutions in the district indefinitely, and those buildings have challenges that really suggest that those children deserve a start from scratch facility. So that's what we're really looking at there, is those being replacements. This school district has done dozens of replacements in its history, its recent history. This is something that's not new for us, and we know that we can successfully achieve that. Finally, I'm suggesting 2 boundary changes. There may be more, but at the moment we're ready to move forward with public awareness of 2. One would be taking the southwestern edge of Taku Elementary on the west side of the railroad track and assigning those students to Campbell Elementary. The other one would be taking a portion of the Ravenwood area and assigning that to Homestead Elementary. I'll talk about those in more detail in just a moment. As I move forward here, I'm going to kind of talk about the various slices of the pie. Now keep in mind that pie is a comprehensive pie. Now we're looking at individual slices, but I just want to illustrate for you how these kind of analyses and studies work so that you understand what was the work that went into these findings. So for example, you will see there that Inlet View is one of our most in-demand facilities. It is very large, so it gets a score of 1. That's a poor score because it's significantly overutilized. That suggests that we need to do something with that facility. That is a small school. We know that if we are to construct a 3- or 4-story facility there, we could do a better job of addressing parent demand in that neighborhood. We know that that is a program and a facility that's very popular, and we know that that's a location that will have a viable operation long into the future. But it is overutilized. Taku is overutilized. You're seeing some of our other facilities there that are overutilized, and then as we slide down below 100%, those numbers start going back up as we get closer to 85%. On the bottom half of the utilization, 2017 utilization situation, you see our schools that are under that 85 or 88% parameter that I like to work with. You'll see right on the bottom of this graphic, Orion and Aurora Elementary. Orion at 54% and Aurora at 39%. So those schools get a penalty right off the bat because they're running about half full. And basically by looking at that, you can see that it's very obvious that those are schools that are in need of some sort of consolidation. Those 2 are just kind of sticking out right on the bottom of that table. In the interest of time, I'm just going to keep walking through these. The next graphic shows district-wide at the elementary level that the majority of our strong concentrations of current crowding are out in the western part of the district, around the West Park area where we currently have a school site. They extend on down into the the kind of the big geographic area of Bear Valley, Rabbit Creek, that's a really big area. So when you look at Anchorage statistics in just a moment, you're going to see that they're forecasting a lot of new units in that area because there's a lot of vacant land there. You have a zoom in of this map in front of you on your board tables if you want to look at that a little bit more carefully. It's right in front of you. You can see where we have heavily utilized schools, and we know that when we get a little bit more student growth, we're going to be looking at those schools being full. Some of the other schools where we're at about 70% utilization, when we come in and we have infill development constructed in those areas, a lot of that leftover 30% is going to be consumed when that new housing comes online. I'll talk about that phenomenon in just a moment, but what we're seeing in the mature part of Anchorage is at least the potential to fill in a lot of gaps that are sitting there. I was surprised by the amount of vacant land that there is in Anchorage when I got here, because I was mostly working up in the Mat-Su and hearing remotely about land shortage in Anchorage. But for the first time, the municipality has cataloged every last bit of it. There's not that much of it left, but it is significant. It's about 19% of the city is left. And when you're looking at schools that are running at 70%, 75% utilization, that would fill in some of those gaps in those utilization curves fairly nicely, or at least it has the potential to do so. The next graphic that you see here shows the Eagle River Chugiak area, and you can see that as we go north there, we have some schools that are very full. You'll see Homestead and Ravenwood sitting next to each other with a lopsided enrollment picture, and just a reasonable guy would say, hey, Homestead's under, Ravenwood's over, let's do a swap. So basically that's what we're proposing via suggesting a boundary change.
Ms. Marsett.
Is there a discrepancy I see on the map that says Chugiak 98, but then on your list of lowest utilized, it has 63? Oh, okay, okay.
Everybody hear that? It's high school versus middle school?
High school, elementary.
Elementary, I'm sorry. So I'll move on to this next graphic. Here's another pie chart, but basically this shows the 81% of the community that's existing and built, and the 19% that's going to come down the road according to these forecasts, that Anchorage has used a 2015 milestone in order to analyze. So because they have consistency with the census, both ICER and Anchorage have been using 2015, although it's 2018 obviously, but they're using 2015 as a milestone just to try to get all the census statistics to line up. So basically if we kind of turn the clock back to 2015, we're looking at an additional 19% housing capacity that would come to us over time. This next graphic shows that what the city is expecting is that we'll become less single family in nature, and there will be more apartments and townhomes into the future. That's happening basically in every community around the country because of housing prices, mortgage rates, a variety of other issues that tend to be pushing young families into multifamily type housing on an increasing basis. The next graphic shows our own 2018 multifamily housing mix. Those blue bars are students with addresses in our database that have a unit number. So basically if you live at 1331 Mockingbird Lane, unit 10, you're probably in a multifamily household. So what we're looking at there is just according to our own data from our own student database this year, we're looking at a third of our students are actually living in some sort of a multifamily residence. And if you look at the JBER statistics, those are 2000 to 30 basically. So it's very profound on JBER because those are all fourplexes and sixplexes. As we look at this, I just want to reinforce that a lot of these students that are coming to us, and it'll be by hook or by crook, it'll be about 9,000 if we continue to get about 0.38 kids per house. So whenever build out occurs, it may or may not be perfectly 2040, but by the time that build-out phenomenon rolls around, when every vacant acre in Anchorage is occupied by some sort of a house, we'll have an additional 2,000 students. 0.39 is or 0.38 is a pretty realistic yield for a community like us, and I don't necessarily expect that to go down very much. This is a very family-friendly community, and I expect that to continue within the horizon with which we are doing our school planning. Here are the numbers for infill housing growth from the municipality of Anchorage, and you can see Airport Heights sitting right on the top there with 1,546 new units forecast by 2040. They're a combination of single family, large lot single family, which are kind of bigger lots on the hillside, compact single family, which are zero lot lines, patio homes, and mobile homes, basically. And then you see two family, which are duplexes, and then townhouses, which are row houses of one type or another, and then multifamily, which are just straightforward apartments. So you can see that in the first half of our schools, we're looking at a range of 1,546 on top down to about 400 new units going into one or another elementary school attendance area as displayed there. Now, the thing to notice is that you'll see some negative numbers in that compact single-family category. And what's happening is Anchorage is redeveloping some of its mobile home parks as they age and those units become harder to occupy or a challenge to maintain. They are forecasting that some of those would come offline and would be replaced by what I call housing authority type housing, which is incredibly successful in this community. You may have noticed some of Cook Inlet Housing Authority's property being developed in the Muldoon corridor over by Fred Meyer, or down in the Fairview neighborhood, or over in other parts of town. The Spenard has 3 big projects that have been incredibly successful, and as I look at those, they're filling up with kids, the rents are attractive, the properties are well maintained. I'm seeing a really successful housing strategy from our municipality as it manages those properties. The next slide just basically shows the bottom half of the elementary schools trending on down to our attendance areas that would have very few new homes in them, and those schools are getting a lower rating on this 2040 growth index. As we get down into that range, we're looking at schools that wouldn't pick up very much.
Interrupt for a minute. We've been joined by Mr. Holleman, who has a question.
Yeah, and this is mainly to help me wrap my head around this. We're looking at an infill 26,000 students.
No.
They're listed for elementary,
That's
or I'm sorry,
students. Housing unit,
housing growth.
9,000 students.
And it's listed for elementary, it's listed for middle, it's listed for high school. So I know they're not going to, I'm trying to think how that impacts at different levels than actual numbers. And I'm just struggling with it.
They've reparsed the data, and I'll just go on to the next page to kind of help address your question. But the next page shows that just reparsed into our middle and high school attendance areas. And that 0.38 kids per house yield that I talked about, you can count on about half of that being elementary. So our elementary school yield's about 0.19 per house. And then our high school yield is about a quarter of that, and our middle school yield's about a quarter of that. So you can kind of think of it in terms of, you know, roughly that, you know, half, quarter as far as how it splits up. But when you look at these individual attendance areas, out of 2,500 of units, a quarter of that 0.38 is going to be about 0.85 or 0.9. So you can do the math there and figure out what the impact might be.
Ms. Plunkett?
My question is back on the elementary.
Sure.
I know that some of the areas, especially for elementary more than others, have a lot of children in transition and have some pretty big numbers of that. Did you take that into account as well with this process?
This data was provided to me by externals. I didn't really have a role in developing it, but our own student data, I have data for homeless children, for children that are in a variety of transition categories, and I have an understanding myself of who's free and reduced, which of our many Title I schools are very high percentage Title I schools. So I'm aware of a lot of those indicators, but the municipality's housing numbers and ICER's conversion of it into school utilization rates is pretty much just looking at aggregate student volumes. As a district, we take that data from there, and as we start thinking about individual actions, we inject our own understanding of some of the challenges those families face as we look at various facility actions.
Mr. Holleman again.
And the population growth is being driven by immigration primarily, or do they see it just being an expansion of the, I'm trying to get an idea of the mix between new people arriving versus families growing up here.
I think they're mostly expecting in-migration driving most of the population growth. The average family size in Anchorage has probably gone down a little bit in recent years. But for mostly what I'm hearing from ICER and what the city is forecasting in their housing absorption is that the majority of this would be in-migration, not necessarily from the lower 48, but other parts of Alaska. Basically, the entire country is becoming more urban. So one of the things that we're seeing is more people residing in cities because of housing options, housing affordability issues. But again, I'm taking their forecasting and I'm looking what their forecast is saying, and I'm trying to provide to you a tool that you can use to make decisions as to whether or not you close schools, add to schools, build new schools, based upon what would be where. Now, I'm not telling you exactly when it will be there, how big it will be, what will you need, but basically I'm trying to create a safety device for the district to use to not make bad decisions on closing, abandoning facilities that it may need in the future, because growth is possible in specific areas. So going on to the next slide, basically I'll talk a little bit about the top 15 facilities here. This isn't a perfect quintile as I referenced, but basically you're going to see Inlet View on the top of this stack as far as schools that are demanding that we know we can keep full, and by 2040 there's housing in those neighborhoods that would produce a lot of schools. That 5.75 is actually a multiplier, so that's 575%. Now keep in mind, Inlet View is a tiny, tiny school right now. So when ICER did this calculation, they were looking at a small population and extrapolating that into a bunch of housing growth. So I kind of had to take what they gave me as a number with a grain of salt, but we know that we need to carefully look at what our demand in that particular neighborhood is going to be, and we know it's probably not going to be 6 times the size of the current school, but we do know that there is enough demand there to justify that we operate that facility long term. As you look farther down, you see Taku has a lot of infill housing proposals in it. Some of the municipality's largest mobile home conversion proposals are in that neighborhood. They're looking at I drive through that neighborhood and see quite a bit of vacant land. Some of it, surprisingly, is developing now as I look around. Then you look on down into Airport Heights, College Gate. That's some of the Muldoon corridor properties, and on and on. Bear Valley, huge geographic area, basically. So it really doesn't take very much effort to understand that there's a lot of vacant land in that area. Estate residential houses don't build quite as quickly as more urban type development, but we know there's enough vacant lot potential there for it to continue to feed. I'll go on to the next slide. Here's the lowest 15. So we're seeing right on the bottom, because we're not looking at any kind of increase in force at Orion or Aurora on J-Bear. We're looking at those schools having a nominal impact. Sand Lake, we know, is a little bit of an odd situation because it's a combined hybrid neighborhood and choice school, and when ICER did those calculations, we're not 1,000% sure of what they did, but we're still looking at that, and we know some of these schools that actually wound up getting a little bit lower rating because of the combined nature of their attendance areas probably would hold on to more enrollment. I'm just going to speed up here, talk a little bit about growing areas. Again, my presentation is very much focused on advising that we be very careful to understand that there is infill potential in Anchorage. At least that's what the city is telling us, and we know that that will fill existing space in many schools. Out in West Park, we have sites available. We know we'll have elementary and middle school needs based on our existing density. I'm watching 3 subdivisions that are putting 5 or 8 new homes online monthly, something like that. I'm out there every 2 weeks just keeping an eye on it. Chugiak, Eagle River, a little bit higher volume. We have a site in the Powder Ridge area. We may need another one out there over the long term. I'm not entirely sure. I'm trying to build a full-scale GIS of that corridor to kind of think about what attendance areas will look like over time. The Muldoon corridor, we've got a site available right at the east end of this corridor here that could serve that area. Bear Valley, we know there's so much ground up there that eventually something would happen up there. It's probably outside of this 22-year horizon the city's talking about. Just some pictures of some of the subdivisions that are happening in that area. Here's some pictures of the Chugiak Eagle River area that focus on the 6,000 new homes that the city is confirming as what the build-out expectation in that area should be. Some of that is being brought online by the Eklutna Tribal Corporation, and we know that those land resources are solid and that we're looking at some continuing development in that area. This last slide shows some of the very fine properties that Cook Inlet Housing Authority is putting online. This is over next to Fred Meyer off of Muldoon. This is really affordable for families. These are rent subsidized. They're a combination of 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, townhouses, and these have been very popular with families, and Cook Inlet is building this type of property all over the city. As far as this education adequacy index, again, we have an upper quintile and a lower quintile. I'm going to try to speed up a little bit here. You can see the EAs that are zeroed out or very low correspond almost exclusively to our new buildings. As we go on down to the education adequacies associated with our older facilities, some of these schools that don't necessarily perfectly comply with our ed specs pop up even though they're newer buildings. But right on the bottom of this you can see Inlet View Central Middle School, Greenig Middle School as being the most challenged education adequacy facilities in the district, hence our consideration of them for change. The next slide talks about facility condition index. So we went from education adequacy, slice of the pie. Again, I'm going around the pie. 8 slices to the pie. Here we are on facility condition. You can see our newest, best, most recently renovated or constructed schools right on the top getting 5 points. As we go down, you see the lower group with Orion, a couple of other schools that are clustered in there. There's Central with an FCI of 0.51, and so on and so forth, and those got a score of 1. Now, we can't judge a school by just one factor, one slice of the pie. This is the whole idea, that we want to look at these schools comprehensively. Remember, we're looking at 8 slices of the pie. Just making sure you understand this is an 8-slice pie. I'll move on to co-located campuses. I gave a bonus to co-located campuses because I really recommend to my customers that that's the best way to put efficient school facilities online. So I really like some of the options we might have in West Park and a couple of other areas where we might be able to look at trying to consolidate a couple of schools on one campus. It's a great way to operate. Next slide talks about average age. This includes renovations. So we went through and we tried to be responsible where we went through and completely renewed a school. We kind of renewed it and gave it a new age, but this was the best age metric that the district had. So the newer schools get a 5. If you go to the next slide, which is the lower quintile, our oldest schools get a 1. And some of the J-Bear schools actually got renewals as of 1998, 1999, so they're not among the oldest schools. You can see Inlet View there down at the bottom, at 61 years of age. couple of other schools that are older in the scheme of things that get a single point. A couple of other criteria that I'm not touching upon: prior investment. What have we spent on these schools over a 20-year period? That's just kind of a standard aspect that any school district viability study is going to look like. That whole thing. I just bought the transmission, basically. That's that prior investment category. And then the facility index for the site has to do with all of those external site amenities, fields, etc. Here is everything in the pie on one page. This is a two-part table. We tried to make it a little bit bigger so that you could read it. But these are the schools that scored 22 or less. And over on the right side, you can see the total column that shows that the first half of this table covers schools that scored 9 through 19, and the second half of the table scored schools that scored 20 through 22. I'll just keep moving here. This is a summary of what I call the school viability summary. And you can see that we have quite a few schools that fit this category. In the event that the district were to find itself in desperate budgetary straits in the next 5 years, this would be a tool that you could use to look at to make some hard decisions based on a comprehensive look at all of the facilities in your capital reserve, capital facilities plant. But basically, Inlet View is sitting right on the top of this pile with the worst score at a 9, and we're suggesting replacement. Then Taku and Homestead are sitting right next to that, and I'm suggesting a boundary change to try to balance those schools. Aurora is also in there, but it's not a closure candidate. It would just be receiving enrollment from Orion. And then down at Central, we're looking at consolidation, transitional use, an innovative program, and some sort of an ultimate replacement of that once we know what's going to happen in the heart of that South Downtown sub-area. The next half of this table has Orion sitting right at the top as our closure on J-Bear, consolidating that into Aurora, creating a larger, more functional program. Down a ways you can see Abbott Loop, which is a replacement. That school scored about 21. And then farther down you're seeing Gruning at replacement. It also scored a 22. Some of these other schools that, even though they scored poorly, are schools that have high utilizations in 2017 or forecast for continued high utilization on into 2040, and their forecast for enrollment growth. And some of those you can see in the red area that they're actually in poor condition. So that basically says, good school, growing area, it's more or less fairly utilized now. It would be fairly utilized in the future once the additional units get built, but it's in poor condition. So that's why it gets a lower score. Again, we're thinking multiple facets of this school viability consideration. Just things to think about. Implementation plans, logistical and educational program analysis. As we move forward to thinking about actually following through and doing some of these things, there are a lot of steps that have to be done. That's one of the things that I get called upon to help with quite a bit. When you have to move something, you have to run something in a temporary school, you have to put portable classrooms in effect, you have to have a construction program, you have to move kids from one building into maybe a surplus building, which is called a swing school, while you rebuild an existing school. Some of those things are things that we have some of the best people around to think about those things and figure out good solutions. And we know that we would have to have adequate time to plan to make those things happen. So as we think about when would anything be effective, we'd have to have plenty of time programmed in to make sure we can pull all those things off. Obviously, in Alaska, the school size factor in our funding formula is always considered as we look at this. We know that there are funding issues here, and we're somewhat blessed by that in that small attendance centers aren't exactly penalized to the extent that they are elsewhere. A multi-year bond strategy is something I've been suggesting to the administration for 3 or 4 months. We currently bond about $55 million every 12 months. And in order to do a replacement of, say, Central Middle School, when that time comes, that will be a big project. It'll be an $85, $95 million project. And that would be something that would be hard to do, to carve a little piece out of several small bonds. So on this next graphic, I show what would it take for the municipality of Anchorage to understand, well, let's do a biennial bond that might be $110 million, so that we could more effectively fit one of those bigger projects into a bond of that scale. Then down below that, you see more of the triennial bond, which is moving toward kind of the standard model elsewhere in the country, where most bonds have a 3 to 5 year horizon, where they're trying to cover their needs for that period of time. Just an idea. Here's the Taku to Campbell boundary change. It's about 29 students that live on the west side of the railroad track. We're currently busing those kids across the track. This is an area that kind of makes some sense for movement. As I continue to develop a GIS resource for the district and identify things that don't make sense from a transportation standpoint, that don't make sense from a community proximity standpoint, these are the kind of things that we observe. This next slide shows the potential boundary change of Ravenwood to Homestead, and you can see that we've got a little kind of piece of Ravenwood in that little crook there just north of the high school boundary that could easily attend Homestead and help balance some of that disparity between the utilization levels of Ravenwood and Homestead. Again, returning to what did I tell you? What I told you was that we're suggesting that we move forward with considering the closure of Orion Elementary. We have a pair of schools on J-Bear, significantly underutilized. We think we could do a better job for those children by operating that part of the capital plant in that area in one facility. And we think that that's probably a good move. Central Middle School, we'd like to suggest, again, some sort of transitional usage, eventually moving away from that being a neighborhood middle school to being more of an innovative program, maybe even just a magnet innovative program, with the eye on that eventually being replaced. It's just a one-story building. From an FCI standpoint, it's probably in the lowest couple of positions in our rating schedule from a condition and education adequacy standpoint. The three replacements there are Inlet View, Abbott Loop, and Greenig. The boundary changes are the Taku to Campbell change, which is pretty much just 30 students, and then about 85 students from Ravenwood to Homestead. I'm delighted to answer your questions at this point and appreciate your attention.
Ms. Plunkett?
So I have a couple. The first is when Sand Lake was expanded, which is newer, as well as Rabbit Creek, which are both show a much higher number. Reloads were put in, permanent reloads, and I don't think those were ever accounted in with the numbers. I don't know what the administration is thinking in regard to that, so that's kind of a thought, is how are you looking at that going forward? And then do you want me to just ask all my questions? Okay, my second question is, especially with the education adequacy, I know on the east side there's several open concept schools that are still open concept that are not wonderful learning opportunities for the children in those schools. And I don't know that you brought that into case. And then especially the area I know really well, you're thinking that a trailer court may disappear, and I think you're probably wrong with Willowa. Prior history, that already was tried once and failed miserably.
Just to respond to those, most of the districts I work with have the ultimate goal of phasing out the portables as a long-term student housing strategy. Now, as I say that, the humor in that statement just resonates with me because I've worked for too many districts that have had portables around forever. But what you were seeing in the municipality of Anchorage's figures were in that Rabbit Creek, Bear Valley area. We're really looking at quite a bit of future potential housing volume in that area. So I would hope that as we bring a new school online over the next 25 to 40 years that that we might be able to address that. The other thing that happens in some of those areas is as those neighborhoods age a little bit, you wind up able to phase some of those portables out. Now, I haven't seen that much of that happen in Alaska yet, but I have seen a lot of it happen in other communities I've worked with in the Pacific Northwest where we kind of
So to be
neighborhoods mature.
more specific, it would look like a boundary change in the future, not a rebuilding or adding to Sand Lake. It may be a boundary issue in 10 years. Mm-hmm.
As far as open concept schools, I've been undoing, rebuilding, shoring up, cursing those for 40 years now. So I feel your pain on your thoughts about those. Every time they get carved up into hard-walled partition classrooms, the classroom sizes wind up being inadequate and the hallways become dysfunctional. So I'm not a fan of open space schools, and I would be the first person to be in favor of replacement of those. Unfortunately, in that 8-factor PI score, some of the schools that we're talking about that were open space schools are actually now in pretty decent condition. They don't always comply with ed specs. I might call on some of my friends from staff to comment on some of those individually if you're interested.
One of the schools through the president to Member Plunkett is Wonder Park. We had quite a bit of discussion about that. And this study is just taking what we should look at first, but remember that was from his scores and his data. And then what we have is the history and the knowledge, and that was a stable neighborhood. It wasn't supposed to grow and it wasn't supposed to decline. So it's really stable at about, I believe it was about 70% capacity. The building, though, does need some renovation, clearly. But in the picture of all of those things, it didn't come to the top as others did. However, my suggestion is what we know and on prior CIP plans or prior discussions that the board has had in different areas, that input is given and considered, and we take these data, which we know are the most recent, and couple them with other concerns that we have in regard to the educational space. That building for educational space on the specs for which it was built meets those. It does not meet present specs. So a lot of the shifting came down to how it scored in relation to the time frame. But that doesn't mean that our board can't say, we're done with open concepts, we've done Gladyswood, we just need to do our next you know, we still have more. I believe I do know we have another one in Eagle River, and so the board can make a decision that we're going to, over the next 10 to 15 years, eliminate our open concept rooms. So it does beg the question. It just didn't, when we didn't want to fudge any of the detail in what the scores are based off of.
Ms. Marsett?
So excuse me, I know Inlet View has a large zone exceptions that
Yes.
attend there. Was that taken into consideration when looking at this?
It was. We know that the number 40% is resonating with me somehow, but we know it's a combination school that is a neighborhood population with an imported population as well. The municipality is still showing quite an influx of permanent units that could potentially result in that being an all-neighborhood school if it needed to be.
And I just have one other question. When we were at the joint assembly school board meeting, some of the assembly members questioned the data that we were using. Can you comment on that?
You know, again, the long-term growth potential of the municipality of Anchorage is what I continue to hear. Because we've had recent year volatility, it's very difficult to kind of understand what the next 5 years or the next 8 years look like. again, that wasn't necessarily my charge to come in and produce new demographic data. My charge was to take existing data and figure out what would be the best way to start to measure and create a decision support tool for future closure, consolidation, addition, and CIP efforts. So I continue to work with what the municipality is providing me in their own data, with what ICER is providing me with their data. I continue to be optimistic about this community and its potential and the diversification of its economy. But again, you know, every time we have a big energy sector hit, it's very hard to stay optimistic about the community. But, you know, again, I'm working with fundamentals that are continuing to point upward, and with vacant land and housing potential in this community, it's not so much a question of will that ever happen, it's when will it happen.
Okay, I'm going to take an opportunity. In the bond that was just passed, there is funding to work at Abbott Loop Elementary School. And now with this recommendation for a complete replacement, that's something this board is going to have to grapple with, whether you put money in a school right before you rip it down. It obviously would be of great concern. So something to think about. Mr. Holleman.
You mentioned the efficiencies that we get in co-located programs like Handshoe, Spring Hill, Service Trailside. What is that efficiency exactly? I mean, I know they're close to each other, but you know, there's no sharing or anything between them. I'm just wondering.
Sometimes there is. When you have a middle and a high school next to each other, faculty can frequently be shared. Elementaries and middles faculty can be shared, but from a maintenance and operations standpoint, you can put a certain FTE of maintenance people in one place to take care of grounds. A lot of times you can share the custodial requirements for a building between a multi-school campus. There are a variety of things that you can do. It's not sweeping, but it is significant as far as grounds maintenance, maintenance issues, roof and repair projects. A lot of times you can do a plumbing project or an electrical project on a 2-building campus as part of one contract. They're just those kind of things that you realize. And then when you have elementary next to middle school and middle school next to high school, you can actually do some staff sharing with clerical people, with nursing staff, with instructional staff as well. There are quite a few opportunities to do business in a more efficient way.
Through the president, a minor one that it just comes off the top of my head just because I know it is Chugach sends algebra kids over to Central. So presently, because I ran into them and they were little and they didn't fit there, and I found out that they were, so that's just one example, but it isn't probably ideal and as savings because it happens at a 0 hour. It doesn't really happen during the day, but I think combinations like that could possibly have a potential in the future if we started thinking that way.
And just to add on, I'm thinking of, I know at East High School there's students that go to Russian Jack, thank you, and do some practicums and things there too. And then the most obvious is, of course, the shared library, the IMC, one facility for 2 schools in the Romick West campus.
And mentoring as well.
And mentoring, yes. Ms. Marsett?
So when we talk about boundary changes, you know, I'm looking at like Huffman, Rabbit Creek, Bear Valley, O'Malley at 69%. Is there a reason we wouldn't take a look at that? Because that area, and also with you talking about Bear Valley being, you know, possibly growth there, that seems like an area that would benefit from some boundary changes too. Is there a reason we wouldn't do that at the same time as the others?
There's not. I'm trying to create an infrastructure for the district with study areas and a GIS resource for it to look at those annually. My advice to my clients on boundary changes is to always do a couple a year and focus on housekeeping and just kind of deal with it as a maintenance issue and use grandfathering, use transitions in order to ease the impact on families and to ease that impact on families in all of these things that we've talked about, where we've proposed a consolidation, a change in school mission, a reconstruction. We have to think about those transitional impacts on families.
Mr. Donley?
Yeah, Inlet View at 142% is, I think, our highest percentage of occupancy. But there was no recommendation for any shift at this time over to Denali, which is only at 85%. I was wondering why you did that.
Denali is a magnet, and so a lot of the students, this may not be showing that school, but I was in there 3 weeks ago and it was brimming. So I think that we've got a lot of choice enrollment coming into that school.
That's correct. So through the president to Member Donley, so Denali actually is Montessori, so the pedagogy is actually different at the two different schools.
It's a combination though, right?
No, it's all.
Isn't it neighborhood?
The neighborhood, and it's all Montessori.
Oh, it's all Montessori,
Yeah.
but it's a combination neighborhood and magnet.
And magnet, correct. And the recommendation for Inlet View is to actually, because of the future growth in that area, as well as just having, it might just be for convenience reason, people who work downtown, right? It's a good school downtown, they could be close to their children. Because there was a recommendation that it needs a new building anyway, rather than move kids and then move them back if there was a new building, if both of those, it was to basically build a larger building, build a building that has more than 250 capacity. That's why it's over capacity, not because it has 600 kids, but because it's only about 250 kids was the capacity of, it's a very small capacity building. So even though the enrollment is nowhere near some of our other elementary schools, the actual footprint of the building is very small. So if we could have a newer school on that building, perhaps it would just be built larger.
And on that same, we have quite a few portables at Inlet View, right?
I'd have to ask the principal's here. We could ask her, but how many? I don't remember seeing portables at Inlet View.
I don't either.
Mm-hmm. It's in our notes, so we'll take a look.
Well, while we're reaching for that, just one more issue with Inlet View Denali, there would be a busing requirement in order to use that space. So the magnet model actually works for us there because it requires less transportation. So that's one consideration in that school. Anchorage attendance areas in school are actually as well positioned as just about any I've seen as far as the schools being more or less in the middle of these attendance areas, but a lot of them are sliced up by big major arterial streets, and that's a case where if we were to try to export students out of Inlet View, they would be going across, is that C Street there? And that would be a transportation hazard.
LNC.
But at the same token, if Inlet View has a whole lot of students that are exempted in, we don't have to transport those students. At least on the short term, I would assume you just wouldn't accept as many non-exemptions. I mean, that would take care of the issue immediately.
Through the president to Member Plunkett, that's correct. And I mean, you could just say nobody additional comes, but that is a building that has come up time and time again needing renovation. So it already needs renovation. And then it had come up in the past about let's just remove it, but it is a highly desirable school. So I have the philosophy that when we build good places and people go to them, it's probably not a good idea to shut them down. Hence, we have a lot of buildings that are in the 70%, 60% capacity that are fantastic schools, but they're in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods. We don't want to combine to make those schools together to find the most efficiency, because we believe that that learning environment is prime where it is in that neighborhood, especially with a lot of walkers. So we went away from then putting a child on the bus to create neighborhood schools in communities, of which we had put a lot of finances into prior to this. So not everything, to just use this as an example, not everything is, the decisions were based off of one factor. It would make sense if it was just boundaries, keep them out, but it's also, well, we need a new building anyway. So we have a successful school, it's large, it needs building anyway, why don't we just make that a higher capacity? The same is with, Central. It's highly desirable program. So maybe we keep a Central and then just house something else with it that wouldn't compete with it. You know, it would be difficult to put a stream in there because there are two science programs, but what if there's another program that could share the space? So it doesn't mean that things at this point would come and go. It's just we're really trying to think, how could we create a district of efficiencies and choice and individualism, but also collectivism of educating everyone and really not taking away the options that we've found that people value. And that was actually part of the Inlet View discussion, because immediately folks were worried that that would be taken off and requested to be removed as it has prior years. And Shannon came in and was like, that is be the last thing I would do is get rid of that school or change it. So it's interesting, the data that he looks at, which is bigger than just schools.
Ms. Snelling?
Thank you. I want to thank you for all the work that you put into this. I can see a lot went into it. I guess one of my questions would be, there's a lot of data in here, and I guess some of it makes me want to ask more questions. Do board members have access to, or can we get access to, how some of the percentages and scores kind of came to be?
That's my intent to, once I heard the questions tonight and understood what your interests might be, to develop interpretives and to position it into a report that you could read and understand at your own pace.
Thank you. I guess one of my concerns is when I'm looking, and I like the 8-point pie concept, but just looking at the education adequacy index, that's the lower quintile one that was on page 23. That's what we're here for, is educating the kids. And I look at it and I see 8 of our middle schools, in the 16 schools listed. And so I want to see kind of what came in behind that, so we can, as a board and administration, take a look at how can we, help reinforce our middle schools, when it's such a transitional thing, which just kind of takes me to my next question. What's next for the board and the administration? What is our next step in this process? We understand this is information coming in this way, so where do we go, from here, especially with some of these recommendations, which none of them are quite honestly surprising. Where next?
Madam President, through the President, through Member Snelling, I would like for you to give guidance and say, come back with a solid, what we would recommend, using these data as well, and then we have something to actually solidly to discuss and to actually have feedback on and community input for which we can, put it out there in the public. But today we want to know, hey, we're not interested in boundary changes. Forget about that. We would rather build new schools. Or we're not interested in building new schools. We want everything to be boundary changed. So just some of your prior questions really had a little bit of those in them. And this is looking at consolidation. We literally provided consolidation, closure, and construction all in one thing. So what we thought we were going into in this study turns out to be a growth plan 10 to 20 to, even further than that. The Bear Valley is further than 22 years out. So positively, we had traction on the school closure bill that was on the legislative items that passed, so that funding wouldn't be. Interestingly enough, the one school is on base, and the transition is 2 to 3 years. So we could grandfather and begin. If we looked at that for 2 years down the road, or 1 year, we could actually do that transition very easily with military families, and Colonel Knight was aware of that and participated with his community as well. The others, discussion, there's still discussion on Central. We could keep Central as a boundary and special mission school, which it is right now, and then have something else, or it could just be special mission. And the boundaries can go elsewhere. The same is true for Greening. It's in a prime location. It's a great, absolute terrific location, terrible facility. There was discussion of putting that facility with Eagle River. However, the consequence there is the traffic is already terrible, and the city does not support that. So then we're back to, well, it's a great location in a neighborhood. Do we then rebuild greening. And then there was another question, well, that came from the Eagle River, said, we would like a consideration, so this is how big it can go. We would like both possibly to explore both our middle schools being 6, 7, and 8. And that would alleviate some of the overcrowding in some of our elementary schools as well. So like one idea comes to another idea. We want to make a recommendation that is sensible to you. Put a price tag on it because there are some, what do you call them, slab offs, rebuilds, scrape offs that we would totally just rebuild that building and rather than phase it in, just for more efficiencies. So if you say, yes, Deena, we see this information, we'll read it, maybe we take a month to do that, not next board meeting, but the meeting after. Have a couple of weeks to read the document, send suggestions. I want to stay away from this, I value this, and then we can have information that's brought back to the board for discussion. Again, Shannon's job here was to give input that we don't do anything rash, that we think about the future, that we, because what I noted on the last, when I read the last school closure items and interests was, where are we today? And we wanted to ensure that we were thinking about the future of Anchorage. And that's the difference, I think. And we used the city's own data for that and the state's own data, research data in ICER. So if you'd like, that's how we can take it. Get Shannon's written report, the board be with that for a couple of weeks, share information that you'd like to share either at the next meeting or in writing, and you come back with a very, very rough draft of this is what we would recommend. Now the recommendation would be over the next 2 to 10 years, this is what we would recommend. It wouldn't be a change out, do this, do that. It's literally a long range plan. And then we would start to build the CIP around that. Once the board then approved that, that would be the new CIP for what's to come next. An item came up about Wonder Park. Maybe we say, wait a minute, I want those to be considered in your plan. You talked about the educational capacity in middle schools. Why are they scoring low? They're actually built on a different educational capacity than the present one. So a lot of them are being used well, the way that they were built, but the education, the rules changed over time. So however you'd like us to attack that, we will, including the things that you want also considered. Because certainly, the first thing that came to my mind was Wonder Park, just like you, because I've been in there and I'm thinking, oh, this is crazy in here, the way that the hallways go one to another. If that's a priority, we include that in this plan.
Ms. Marsett, and then Mr. Donley.
So my concern too is the immediate, and I know we just lost 600 students this school year, and I think we're probably going to lose a large number of students next year too, and maybe I'll be wrong, I hope so. And I think it's hard to go to the public when you're losing that many students and propose a plan like this. So I guess that's my concern a little bit, is that, we are losing students. If we continue to lose students in the near future, it's going to be hard to propose, a bond to replace the school or build new or whatever. So what is your recommendation on how we approach that?
I'll actually, Madam President, to Vice President Marsett, we already have to do something with those aging buildings. It's a given. Abbott Loop, Inlet View, and Greening, those they were already on our radar. So we have to do something. And if it's shutting down a whole school and sending kids everywhere else, that's probably more of a disruptor to me than going to our public and valuing their neighborhood schools and the schools that they have. Immediately, I would, I think the timing of new construction needs to come when the state brings back some share, because that's certainly going to mean a lot to our public. When we paid 60% or 70%, or the state paid 60 or 70% of the cost of a new building, that was incentive to take care of our buildings and build. We've been on the flat road for a while of just safety and security because we're in this state, the state of this hiatus, if you will. But I would start with the easier ones to tackle. I would start with what's on base. I would move to 2 years down the line, we're transitioning to new boundaries. We wouldn't do it in a year, we'd do it over time to allow parents who had third graders to stay, and as your new ones start, to consider, hey, after 2 years, you're not going to have a ride, but you will have one to this school. So sometimes parents want to start their younger kids. So getting the word out there, but having the 2-year notice as to what might happen sometimes supports, those plans. And then our goal would be, when the state is back up and functioning, that we begin to take care of the 85, 86 facilities that we actually have. I think the quote was made, we could put one a year every year, and it'd still take 85 years to keep up with our construction and our maintenance on our buildings. So one a year technically really isn't that bad, But again, it would be a larger picture of that communication.
Mr. Donley.
Yeah, Mr. Bingham, did you consider any changing any of the schools to a K-8 system to adjust for some of the discrepancies in occupancy?
I did not, because we're so dense, we couldn't it would be difficult to just do one because of the different size of the student body of an elementary versus a middle school. But that would certainly be an option if it were something the district were interested in. I've certainly activated more K-8s than anybody in North America, so it's something that I do a lot, but it was not suggested as something I was looking at. I was looking at a little bit at 6-7 versus 6-7-8, and I continue to be interested in figuring out a way to get us on one consistent grade configuration. But I didn't look at K-8 redeployment.
Yeah. That's something I'm really interested in. I thought we were going to take that into consideration in this study, and we talked about it 6 months ago, 7 months ago, in fact, and so I'd be very interested if that's an option that might present some viable additional options for us. Another question I had, did you take into consideration the footprint at some of these schools? I mean, the size of the area, because some of the schools that are listed here also have some issues with, they don't have a very large playground area or parking lots and the actual size of the land that they're sitting on.
I think the site FCI was something that we used to attempt to estimate that, but I'm thinking of just the 25 or 30 schools that I've been in. Inlet View is a great example of a school with a footprint problem. So our solution there is a 3-story building. So some of the schools that are in the Midtown area, well, not Midtown, but the schools that are more in the downtown area, Government Hill area, those schools are schools that are on small sites. The J-Bear schools all seem to be on generously sized sites, but for the most part, I think most of the schools that are constrained like that are downtown. I do a lot of work in urban school districts, and most districts just decide to kind of live with that. But I think it's certainly something that's a consideration here, and I think those sites probably have low site FCIs.
Then my final thing I wanted to mention was, you mentioned Abbott Loop. Well, we were faced with an immediate code issue with Abbott Loop, and to replace that building is a multi-year proposal. So I think it's wise to proceed with not getting the building shut down by the fire marshal, in the next 2 years. I mean, because even if you were looking at a replacement, that's something that is going to be farther out on the time frame.
Okay, I'm looking at the time now, and we're about 10 minutes over. But Mr. Donley, this is your call because this part of the agenda is dedicated to you. So at this point, I think board members, I would like you to ponder this information. I'm assuming we can get a copy of the PowerPoint immediately. I didn't see it in board docs, but I can go back and look. And then start to either written comments or be prepared to come back and do some oral discussion at our next work session on May 7th. Okay, so we're going to move on in the agenda then to our Council of Great City Schools Conference report. Mr. Donley.
I don't know if Mr. Anderson or Mr. Garrity wanted to join us. I attended the Council of Great City Schools legislative conference in Washington, D.C., and I attended several programs for the newer board members, and I was also accompanied by Patrick Garrity, our Director of Federal Programs, and Jim Anderson, our CFO. And we divided up the many meetings that were going on among the three of us, so I think we covered everything, didn't we, gentlemen? I think we did.
Yes.
So as you might expect, there was a lot of emphasis on school safety and federal funding of education. There were several programs that dealt with very complex issues surrounding the implementation of the Every Child or Every Student Succeeds Act. We had presentations from 2 members of Congress, high-ranking Department of Education officials, and congressional staff on both sides of the aisle. I did monitor the executive board meeting, but since our member Snelling is a member of the executive board, I was not allowed to vote. The group adopted the proposed resolution on school safety that we discussed at our last communications meeting, and they did vote to adopt that as an organization, which was, I was told, was quite unusual, because typically in inquiring, I was told the Council of Great Soda Schools typically prepares resolutions for consideration, to assist the individual school districts in their consideration of whether it adopts something or not. But they went ahead and adopted the proposed resolution on their own as a group. Some of the key issues and new information I identified were changes to federal law regarding military impact funding and allowing it to be used for private vouchers. I was really surprised to hear this, and that this was coming, because of all the districts I can imagine. This would probably have a greater significance on us than a lot of districts around the country, probably Fairbanks also. That is a huge change that could be coming very quickly, and something we may need to have some preparation for. The tax bill changed the way that school bonds work. The recent Omnibus Tax Act to eliminate interest-free tax credits that many of the districts were expressing concerns about. And I'm not exactly sure how that's going to affect us, but it sounded rather concerning. Teacher certification was discussed, and I was amazed to find out how weak it was in some states. There were possibly 11 states allowing certification by internet schools of questionable merit, and that was really surprising to learn about. The Council of Great City Schools is developing multiple techniques to save member school districts money, including some very interesting combining purchasing and something they were calling reverse auctions for purchasing. They're also developing a guideline for crisis communication strategies and community group developing protocols. So that, I thought, could be of great use to our district also. They're developing materials and tools to assist school districts in addressing the performance gap among minority students. They're developing recommended materials to assist with special education instruction. They're also developing a board member training program, which there seemed to be a lot of excitement about by the participants there. They have a new task force on district IT practices, and they're willing to send experts to assist local member districts in upgrading or reviewing our IT practices, Mike, and seeing if they can offer any assistance there. Multiple districts reported actual reductions in state funding for public education. That was particularly concerning and frightening, that some of the states were, instead of holding it even, as the huge challenge that we've been faced with, actually were reducing the amount of money going to their districts. The Council of Great City Schools is developing a strategic plan for itself with goals that are going to be presented at the July Executive Board meeting here in Anchorage. So that's going to be very interesting for the future of the council also, and we'll have a front row seat for that in July. Many states appear to be lowering their educational expectations, just as we have actually been raising ours, in an effort to help them comply with Every Student Succeeds Act. States are combining previously individual measures of success into new combined measures to simplify, and that may be a way to conceal the lack of progress. So there's a lot of manipulation for how the Every Child Succeeds or Every Student Succeeds Act is being reported by how they're structuring the things that they track and combining things. There was some important recent and ongoing federal court litigation that's going to impact the level of benefits school districts must provide to children with special needs. And there was an interesting new standard that was adopted by the court, and that was, quote, reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. And I believe we're all going to be hearing those words a lot and learning more about that. The Council on Great City Schools has information to help school districts consider the school start time issue. So I don't know if we've reached out to them on that or not, but they are helping school districts around the country study that issue just like we're doing. And the districts are, some of the districts said they're doing employee exit surveys to identify issues with employment, especially the ones that were losing funding and having a serious turnover problem. The National Conference of State Legislatures has a new report that was discussed on public education, and it's called No Time to Lose, if the members would want to take a look at that. The Florida state government passed extensive school safety legislation that I think we've all heard about that includes placing a police officer in every school, possibly arming school personnel, raising the purchase price of rifles to 21. But there was funding for school hardening and increased mental health funding. Florida is also requiring decertification votes for its current educational unions and adopted 2 new vouchers. One voucher was funding school change for students who are bullied, and a second was a charter school initiative. So there were about 35 of the 70 member school districts that had representatives. Many of the districts sent more than 1 or 2 or 3 representatives, frequently the superintendent or the CFOs or other folks, especially those that are really impacted by the complexity of federal funding programs. And it is really challenging. There was a lot of discussion of what was going to be in the omnibus spending bill, and there was a huge concern at the time that the House had zeroed out Title II funds, which was really surprising, and I actually had a discussion with Congressman Young about that while I was there, and eventually there was funds put in the omnibus bill for that, but in the Senate had money in, but the House had 0 in, so that was kind of scary because we do some of our important things here with that source of funding. Had a meeting with Senator Murkowski and her chief of staff, and our discussion focused on school safety issues and education funding, Title II and school safety, and the role of the federal government in education. And she expressed a great interest in our district communicating what actions we finalize and take on school safety and trying to coordinate them, and she offered to help any way she could. Senator Sullivan, we discussed school safety issues and specifically, again, the Title II funding, trying to hold it in the conference committee, which they succeeded in doing. And we actually rode the underground train with him to the Senate floor and talked to him as we went. He was scheduled to act as the presiding officer at that time. Both senators were certain that the omnibus bill would include some school safety money, but as I learned more at the meeting of the council, you know, it sounded like a lot of money, $75 million, $100 million, but when you spread that out across the nation, it's just very, very tiny bit of money. It's very little chance that many districts will get any of those funds. To us, it seemed like a lot of money, but when you deal with the magnitude of the problem across the nation, it really wasn't very much. So that's my general report, and I know that the gentleman, there was the complexity of federal funding and legislation was astounding, and it was really useful to get up to speed on that. So I found it a very useful, very, very useful conference. Thank you.
Did any of you would you like to add something quickly?
It's really hard to add to that. The only thing I picked up on top of what was just mentioned is Council of Great City Schools will be publishing their latest white paper on procurement guidelines, standards, and best practices for public schools at the October conference in Baltimore. So it didn't appear that there'll be a draft that comes out. It'll go to the superintendents and board members at that meeting. And I'm sure, like all the other KPIs and white papers that come out, It'll be pretty in-depth with some pretty focused areas to look at. So I know Mr. Whiting will be just excited when Dr. Bishop comes back.
Mr. Garrity?
So one of the big interests I have when I go there is that the council does an excellent job in forecasting funding for some of the title programs. And they do an excellent job giving a rundown of what's going on in Congress, and they make some predictions on what will happen budgetarily. One of the things that they are predicting, and they do this for all the council districts, is that Anchorage our funding is kind of based on poverty census data from past years. And the poverty census data that is being used for our current funding shows a decrease in our number of students in poverty. And the upshot of that is, a couple years ago we had a big uptick in our funding, about $3 million additional in Title I funding. And the uptick of the falling of the census data is that we're going to see a decline. So state and federal sources have told us to expect about a 10% decrease, and the council indeed was predicting about that. Depending on the budget that was chosen by Congress, it could be anywhere from 900,000 to 1.5 million reduction in Title I. Congress chose an allocation level that's about their middle of the road, so it would be somewhere between 1 and 1.5 million in reduction to Title I. And so that's something we're looking at and planning on in the district, is how to adjust to that in the coming years. And it looks like we're going to go back to an allocation level that was more in line with what we had a few years ago, somewhere between 13 and 14.5 million.
Okay.
So that's what we saw there. It was kind of an interesting thing.
Thank you for that heads up. Not good news, but heads up. And thank you very much, Mr. Donley, for that comprehensive report. Would you consider sending the written copies so we could send that out and board members could continue to review that?
Sure, it's kind of in a note version, yeah.
Right, if so at some point send it to Katy for distribution. Thank you. And Ms. Snelling, when the National Executive Council meeting is here, do they have seats in the peanut gallery? Can anybody come and observe?
They can't say for any closed, executive sessions, but it is all open to public and.
And do we have a location and date yet?
It's the Hilton is where everything's going to be held, and it is, let's see, it's July 2021.
Okay, great. Appreciate that very much. Okay, we're going to move on. We're just a few minutes behind. We're moving on to our focus on students, staff, and community. And Dr. Bishop, would you please?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming this evening. We are now at the point in time on the agenda for a time called Focus on Staff and Students. And this time occurs at every board meeting, so twice a month, in an effort for the board as well as district, as the district as a whole, we focus on what makes ASD great. And really, it comes down to the people, the students, the community members, parents, and our employees. So at this point in time, we have, I believe, 4 items to present. And I'm going to start with the 2018 Alaska Points of Light Youth Leadership Institute, or PILI. I may have many students to call. As I call your name, please come forward, and then we're going to say really good things about you and your experiences and give you a recognition from the school board. And I apologize in advance for pronunciations of names, but you can whisper in my ear and I'll try my very best to get it right. So, Joya Cook, Gabriella Delara, Jadwan Jennings, Nikki Kim, Davion Poindexter, Adara, please come forward and you can start over here. Adara Edwards, Jabrina McKell, Anna Yang, Omi Patty Hydra, Zella Bozeman, Falele, Ruth Faliofio, that one I need to learn. That's a good one. Helena Maestis, Siriana Pelaputi Tafun, Navun Ward, Isabella Roll, Tiara Poindexter, Ozma Akal, Damian Dawson, Yasmin Dawson, Rwanda Dirie, Margaret Howard, Othello Howard, Heidi Kim, Jet Kim, Annalisa Lee, and actually we could just hand these to their director if you want, and then we could have the whole pile. He probably can help us. Let's see, we were on Jet Ki, Annalisa Lee, Mei Seng Tao, Wyatt Alexander, Dayton Fisher, Mina Fisher, Yul Zhang, Savion Bishop, that was one that I knew, David Holmes, Isabel Mavick, Denise Bomerang, Bella Acuna, Sasha Addison, Aiden Fuerte Dominique, Jahim Fuqua, Margaret Lewis, Nathaniel Luke, and Will Cheney. Come on up if you're here, and we're going to take the whole room. And I saw the evening that you were all announced at the assembly meeting, so you can kind of do the same thing, just kind of gather around. And I'd like everyone in the audience to know that 40 Anchorage School District students recently graduated from the 21st Annual Alaska Points of Light Leadership Institute. Since the first Alaska Pi Light held in 1998, more than 1,000 Alaskan students from across the state have graduated from an institute with one of the best and longest running community youth trainings of its kind anywhere in the United States. The mission of Pi Light is to provide diverse middle-level and high-level high school students with the encouragement, peer networks, and leadership skills necessary for them to make a positive difference in their neighborhoods, schools, and communities, and to begin a lifelong journey of leadership and service. These young, outstanding youth leaders in front of you are our 2018 Alaska Points of Light Leadership Institute participants. They participated over their spring break in 40 hours of community leadership training that included 5 days of skill development and instruction in self, community assessment, team communication, diversity, goal setting, project planning, decision making, and service learning activities. Please join me in congratulating these accomplishments and these students for their accomplishments from graduating from the Alaska Points of Light Leadership Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, you are whom, I guess, or what makes ASD great. Thank you very much. And here. And we did, their fearless leader is here as well, Mr. Bo Bassett, who has been volunteering his time and working with the district and different community agencies and banks that provide money, and he does it all from the development to the teaching. And we have one student that we would love, since we have time, to speak on the experience and what it was about and what it meant to you and things like that. So you say your name, and then you have to hold this thing really close though, sorry.
Hello, my name is Bettye Davis. I'm a sophomore at West Anchorage High School. And I think I speak for all of us in saying we are extremely grateful for the opportunity that we had over spring break for Pi Light. Pi Light is this leadership camp that helped us learn new skills that we will use in the future and also reinforce the skills that we already had. Throughout this experience, we all created new friendships and created new leadership skills that we will forever be grateful for. And I think that all the skills that we learned is something that we will hold dear to our hearts and will forever use. Thank you.
Well, I think you're pretty awesome. And I said her name is Bella, but pronounced it in Espanol, Bella. So thank you. And phenomenal. And as you can see, if the rest of your peers speak as well as you do, we can see why you're going to be leaders of the future. You're already leaders now. Thank you so much. And then we get a picture for our website. Is that all right? Okay.
Did you see it? I'd like to thank the superintendent and the president of the school board. Without their support, I don't think the word would have gotten out in the school district. It's very challenging to present opportunities to all young people in the community. And the superintendent supports servant leadership. And for the first time in 20 years of this program, there's been a welcoming around a service leadership. And I want to commend you You know, Tam Agosti-Gisler has been a committed service leadership and servant leader forever. I want to thank her. The Director of Counseling, Diane Lemon, allowed us to present to all the school counselors, which was critical to get the word out. I want to thank Assistant Principal Nikki Banks Hodge, who happens to have been trained in PILI more than 17 years ago before she actually became a teacher. And she's now an assistant principal. I think she's here. Yes, she is. I want to thank Ghislaine Gillespie and Joyce Sperry, counselors at Clark Middle School. Did an incredible job with outreach to Clark students, and I'd like to thank the Upward Bound advisor at West High School, brand new to this community, Jessica Delgado, recruited 4 outstanding West High Eagles for the training. So it's all about caring adults and professionals reaching out to our young people, as we know, and presenting this great opportunity. The school board is going to receive a copy of the 150th anniversary booklet, which honors the 150 years of Alaska statehood. Plus, April is National Poetry Month. So you have an assignment. It's called an autobiopoem. It's one of my favorite activities, and each of these students did an autobiopoem, so they're going to hold you accountable. So there's a copy for you, and your poem is in there. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We'll get a set up for a good picture.
And if you can see me, I can see you.
Okay, everybody look at this way. Congratulations, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. The next item is the 2018 Geography, not Geography B, but the Geography, which is a little different. It's a YouTube little slant on that. So please come forward, Joshua Leva, Brianna Crowther, and their teachers, Michelle O'Leary and Katy Behringer, from Greening Middle School. And if their teachers aren't here, I know their principal is. Come on forward. So, I would like to share with you that students at Greening Middle School were recently treated to an exciting and informative geography, I don't want to say geography B, but it's geography with a popular YouTube star, Paul Barbado. Barbado recorded a show live from Greening where students participated in rounds of competition-style geography questions. Greening is now one of the 5 schools competing for the coveted Globe Trophy nationwide. Cameras rolled as 20 students and 4 teams took the stage. By round 2, they were whittled down to 10. In round 3, eliminations reduced 5 contenders to 2 finalists, Joshua Leva, did I pronounce it right? Joshua Leva, and Brianna Crowther. All right. Joshua won on a flag question by identifying Ireland's national symbol, which is? Is that what you won on? The flag. The flag. Yeah. You won that. What did you have? Oh, you had to identify Ireland's flag. Excellent. So you identify, what does it look like? Can you tell us now?
White, green, and orange.
All right, white, green, and orange. He knew it. All right. He was awarded the Globe Trophy and gets to carry the distinction of being the winner of the Geography Now Geography. The whole group of 20 students is also the big winner at the end of the event. In about a month or so after Barbado has edited video, they will appear before his YouTube following of educators and students all over the world. Congratulations to Joshua, Brianna, and all the Greening participants, and thank you to Michelle O'Leary and Katy Behringer for creating this opportunity for your students. You absolutely make ASD great. Congratulations. Would you like to say anything about it, Brianna or Joshua? since, no? What got you, how do you know so much about geography? Like, obviously, there's hundreds of kids in your school, and you are the only two standing up here. So something must be special about you.
We studied a lot.
What's your interest? Like, how did you get interested in it? So, just interesting places, things? Have you traveled a lot?
I haven't traveled a lot, but I want to.
Perfect. Excellent. How about you?
Well, my parents are from Central America, and that kind of like wanted me to learn more about other countries and stuff.
That's excellent. You have a little superpower there. Cool. So thank you to both of you. An excellent job, and I can't wait to watch YouTube, and we're allowed to watch YouTube now in school, so that's awesome. We used to not be allowed to. So congratulations. We're going to take a picture for our website. Is that all right? You guys are famous winners. All right. Thank you so much. And now, the next event is the exciting news of the 2018 4A Girls Basketball Champions, Diamond High Links. Please come forward. Woo! I'd like to announce the seniors, Sienna Bialo, Victoria Johannesson, Maya Carley, Megan Jones, and Johanna Hajdukovic. Jana Hajdukovic. I got the Hajdukovic. It must be Polish or something. Okay. Juniors. Alyssa Keeley, Deshauna Schuster, and Larissa Parker. Or Larissa. Is it Larissa? Got it. And sophomores, Ariana Camacho Villafuerte, Angeline Nagiak, and Michaela Lawrence. Please come forward. This is quite exciting, and the exciting part about it is that they matched up this year to the same finalists last year, and they put them down this year. Let me read about it. The Diamond High School girls basketball team capped off a remarkable season on Saturday, March 21st, beating the reigning state champions of Wasilla High 61-46, so it wasn't even a competition. They finished the season undefeated with a record of 32-0 and a Max Preps Girls High School National Basketball ranking of 24 in the nation. Ladies, nice. Give them a hand. Their season started with two impressive tournament titles back in December. Doc Larson Tournament in Wasilla on the Wasilla Warriors home ground, and the West Coast Jamboree title in Concord, California. The outstanding competition in California included top-tier and state-ranked girls basketball programs in Northern California. And that really doesn't matter anymore because we're nationally ranked. The Diamond Girls basketball program is qualified for the state tournament the last 15 of 17 years under Coach Young and Coach Stahl's coaching tenure at Diamond High School, and they're co-coaches, I believe. Is that correct? Which includes 4 Alaska state titles and 10 Cook Inlet Conference titles. Congratulations to the Diamond 2018 State Basketball Champions. You make ASD great. Woo! So, who is your captain? Captains, come on over here. Hajdukovic right next to her. And you two can share a little wisdom. And Hajdukovic, you're gone too, and you're leaving as well? No, you're junior. I've been watching you play for a long time. Yeah. So, okay, so you two chat about your season and whatever you'd like, your state champions.
Well, it was definitely tough. We didn't do it without hard work and working together. We couldn't have done it without each other or our coaches or without our community. So thank you so much for all you do and all you contribute. And yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. She covered it all. But yeah, I'm really thankful for this team, and I'm glad we got to end the season with the bang.
Coaches?
I just want to thank everyone for giving us this chance, opportunity to be up here. And I know Dr. Bishop has Wasilla ties there, yeah.
My daughter graduated there. But she played volleyball.
She did. Actually, Coach Jeannie and I are still good friends, so we are on the same committee. So, but again, really the credit goes to these kids. Or I should say, these young ladies. They did a great job this year of really just buying in and making their sacrifices, and so, you know, they all came together, one team, one dream, and I told them it was their time to shine. So, they took care of business, and so again, hats off to these young ladies. So.
And it wasn't even close. Ladies and gentlemen, your Lady Lynx. And we would also like to announce the 2018 Coach of the Year with Laura Ingham from East High School. Please come forward. So, Laura is the head coach of East High School girls basketball program. Were you also in the state tournament? I was. You were. I think I did see some East High School ladies play. Laura was recently recognized for 2 distinguished awards. Not only Coach of the Year for our region, but Laura has the honor of the Coach of the Year for the entire state of Alaska. There you go. She is also an East High alum. And she played as a point guard for the T-Birds, and we don't have to mention the year, but she was also, what, 98? All right, so nice. So 20 years ago, and she's back on the court. So Laura was twice recognized during her play as the Player of the Year for the state of Alaska. After graduation, Ms. Ingham went to play for 4 years at a Division I level, where in 2003 she compiled the first triple-double in the history of women's basketball program. Now, a triple-double is signs for a standing ovation. Yeah, good job. Yeah. Most recently, Laura has just completed a successful first season as the head coach at East High. And the Lady T-Birds made it to the Region 4 Championship this year and qualified to move to the state, where they took 3rd. So they were up there. She does great work with kids both on and off the basketball court, and she is a security specialist for East High and a foster parent. According to Sam Spinella, who I believe is here this evening, he can come forward, the principal at East, she has strong people skills and knows how to build to kids' strengths. Laura is passionate, not just about the game of basketball, but in developing each and every one of her players and for having them reach their full potential. Congratulations on your awards for not only Coach of the Year for our region, but for State Coach of the Year, Laura Ingham. Did I pronounce it right? All right. Thank you for all you do for students, and thank you for making ASD great. Shake your hand. Where'd you go to school? Oh. And she played at the Ohio State. Very cool. Yes. So here, we're going to give you the microphone. You can say whatever you'd like, words of wisdom to us. We want to hear from you.
My speech is in the car. I thank you for bringing me out here and doing this recognition. I have an opportunity to work with an awesome group of kids. The parents are great, and the coaches are even better. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Congratulations. I happen to love this basketball. All right. Awesome. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our focus on staff and students. Finish right before that. All right.
And I'll entertain a motion for adjournment of the work session and a movement into executive session.
I move that we move into executive session for the purpose of legal update and superintendent evaluation.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Work session is adjourned and executive session is now open. Thank you. Great job.